So we're broadcasting now, and thank you so much for joining in. I think we have a couple more people who are going to patch in. And last week was really frustrating because we had David Goldblatt, who's this very well-known soccer journalist. I had him on the line, but his internet was messed up, and so we had to cancel the Google Hangout. So I'm really glad to have all of you here this time and not to have any technical troubles so far. And I just thought we'd talk a little bit about whatever you want. Whoops. And the reading that we had done for this week was from my book about, let's see here, my book about Tiger Woods. And I was actually thinking a lot about Tiger Woods. I don't know if all of you are following American sports, but this whole controversy before the Super Bowl about Richard Sherman. Did you guys all follow that, or some of you? I don't know if Michelle in Brazil, that was,
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I did.
Well, one of the things that was really interesting to me in the story of Tiger was all the stuff that you see off stage on blogs and message boards and so forth. And one of the things that I was writing about in the book is how in the United States now we have this kind of idea that race is fixed, and in particular that, you know, like 50 years ago, you could use all these nasty words and say these kind of stereotypical things on TV or in a political speech, but now we're ultra correct in our public life. So if any sports broadcaster doesn't say exactly the politically correct thing or uses some kind of negative word, they lose their job and we get mad at them and so forth. But my point with the Tiger Woods book was kind of like all these racial stereotypes and this racial bad feeling and negativity, it's still there in America, but it's kind of been driven underground, and you can now get a glimpse of it. I mean, I actually think we've made a lot of racial progress in the United States, but you get a glimpse of the way that these kind of stereotypes and nasty words survive when you go onto the internet, because there you see people, because they have anonymity, can say stuff, sometimes just to cause trouble, like trolling, but also, you know, give vent to these feelings that they wouldn't use words that they wouldn't use in public because they'd be afraid of losing their jobs or getting in trouble or whatever. And with Richard Sherman, it was exactly the same. Like if you went on the message boards and stuff, there was all this N-word and he's a this and a that and all this kind of like racial hatred that was, again, kind of visible in the underworld, the underbelly of the internet. But then I was kind of interested, I don't know if any of you followed this, like a lot of sports radio personalities and stuff came out and defended Richard Sherman and said, well, you know, he has a right to do what he wants, you know, to say what he wants, he's like Muhammad Ali and so forth. And to me, there was kind of like a dimension there of self-congratulation and of people feeling like, you know, I'm gonna show what a well-meaning liberal I am by saying that Richard Sherman's trash talking and stuff didn't bother me. So it was kind of like this weird turn where you were like, you know, professing to, you know, be down with what Richard Sherman was saying as a way of kind of like showing that you were enlightened and didn't have any of these negative stereotypes. So I'm just blabbing on, but the point is about like with Tiger, with Richard Sherman, it's just like the news is a constant festival of stuff to like think about in relationship to issues of politics and race and gender and sexuality. I mean, sports is just like a gold mine for thinking about our society. So I would just turn it over. I mean, like, what are some of the issues that you've been thinking about in relationship to sports and politics and the news? And if any of you are interested in golf in particular, we can talk a little bit more about that and Tiger.
I'll speak on Brazil.
Yeah, why don't you go first, Michelle?
I'm in Campinas, Brazil, and I'm from the United States, but I'm here during the preparations for World Cup, and I've been here 2 years, and I'm working with public school English teachers, and if you're aware, there's been a lot of protests in Brazil in the past 6 or 7 months because of education, because of healthcare, and it's very interesting to me to see the World Cup, it appears, underground here, is going to be the stage for a lot more protests. And just recently, 2 weeks ago, I work with public school teachers. They totally changed the whole public school in the whole country of Brazil. Changed the schedule, the calendar for the school to accommodate the World Cup. So it's amazing how much power it has.
So what, like, there were all the protests around the Confederations Cup. Do you think that that's going to be repeated around the World Cup?
I do, and they have a lot of power. They've closed down highways. And there were protests again last week. I'm in a university town. There's frequently protests here, and the majority of the protesters are people I work with. They're public school teachers. They're young university students who can't get work. So it's a very, it's a very widespread movement in terms of people wanting rights, and it's mostly middle class. Recently, too, there's been the other undercurrent that's happening where the kids from the favela are going into the shopping malls.
Right, I've been reading about that.
So this is another thing, but I think the World Cup is going to be a huge stage for a lot of political protests here in Brazil.
So what about, like, I know there's been a lot of talk about this, but, the famous Brazilian love of football as the kind of national sport and point of pride. So, on the one hand, a lot of people are happy that the World Cup's there and they love soccer, but then on the other hand, they want to protest. So how are those two things kind of, the desire to have a beautiful World Cup and maybe to see Brazil win, but then on the other hand, the desire to disrupt the World Cup and to use it as a forum for protest about things that are going on in Brazil?
Well, I think that one of the things that is an undercurrent there is that money that's going into the World Cup is not going into the Brazilian public. It's going into the hands of the politicians who are building these stadiums. So there's a lot of anger on their part that these billions of dollars are being spent on the World Cup, which they're proud of, but not giving money to education and to other things. So they are conflicted about that. But I'm finding that more people, not more, but many feel like they would sacrifice the success of the World Cup for a political statement. And there's an expression here, jeito, like to have a jeito. And Brazilians always find a way at the very last minute. It's a way to do something to make things successful. So they've said that, and the other side too is that they're not, in my opinion, they're not prepared at all. They're saying they're prepared, but they'll figure a way to make it all right in the end. But I think there's going to be a lot of interesting political situations going on during the World Cup. I won't be here, so I'm leaving in April, so I'll be back in the States. But my friends have told me that they think it's a good platform to make the government listen to them.
Yeah. Praful, what are your interests in sports and politics and whatever?
Well, being from India, I'm a big cricket fan. And one of the conversations that I've had so many times was cricket versus hockey. At one point, hockey was the national sport of India, but cricket is the love of India. People just eat, drink, and sleep cricket there. No matter what the situation is, how bad the team is, doesn't matter. So I always found that interesting that people who were more rabid hockey followers were just so anti-cricket because their sport wasn't getting that much publicity. And since Indian cricket team has been very consistent over the past couple of decades since I've been following it, it just got more sponsorship, more money flowing in, not necessarily government money, but just private sponsors. And these cricketers are making so much more money than the hockey players are. The facilities are so much better for cricket. The money, again, is the biggest factor these days in sports, I think, no matter what country you're in.
Are there any examples with cricket of what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago of activist athletes? In other words, famous cricketers who are using their fame as a platform for talking about social issues of one kind or another, or getting into politics, or?
I don't really think that's happening. Some of the cricketers have made the jump after retiring to politics, but Indian politics, it's a whole nother story. It's just a whole big bowl of wax that nobody wants to really go into the details. One of the biggest cricketers, I guess he's probably the most successful cricketer in the whole world, is Sachin Tendulkar.
Right.
And he recently became the member of the parliament. but the member of parliament, so Indian parliament is divided into two houses. He's the member of the upper house, which doesn't really do much. Just like Indian president doesn't really have any powers, it's the prime minister who runs the country. So that's sort of the upper parliament, upper house, where he's the member of, and he's not going to do that much. The other cricketers who turned politicians, they had more cricketing responsibilities than they took, and they never really took politics seriously. Some of them were nice, like in 1983, India for the first time won the Cricket World Cup, and the then captain of the Indian team, Kapil Dev, he was very influential, and he was a very straightforward guy in the world of cricket. Be it Indian cricket itself, he used to make sure that everybody was on the same page, and if somebody, even the best players, the most popular players, were hurting the team, he'd make sure that he got his point across by either benching them or making sure they're fined or something like that. And he has definitely raised his voice in politics, but I think it's relatively mute to an
Why do you
extent.
think? Why do you think India? I mean, kind of India's famously not won a lot of gold medals in the Olympics,
Exactly.
and the
Yep.
soccer team is very poor. And
Yep.
why do you think that is? Is it that so much of like the top athletic talents are going into cricket, and it sucks, and hockey, and it sucks the air out of everything else? Or why? What are some of the explanations for that, do you think?
I think one of the biggest explanation was what you gave in your recent lecture this week about politics or the government putting in more money. Like it mentioned, from the 1983 World Cup onwards, Indian cricket, because that was the team after a long time that won anything in Indian sports. And since then, its popularity has grown like massively that everybody just wants to play cricket and nothing else. Tennis is becoming more popular, but I feel like most of these sports and most of the youngsters my age or even younger who are going into sports are more directed towards money than really the patriotic feel of winning a gold medal at the Olympics. Because everybody knows, I mean, even the dream team here, the basketball team, or every year for the Olympics, they have such a huge controversy on which players will be going as part of the American NBA team and which players won't be. And the biggest issue there seems to be again money. And that's the major thing again in India. Cricket has the most money. Cricket is just bleeding money right now. So everybody from the domestic levels, like from age 5, they just want to play cricket, nothing else. Hockey is trying to catch up, but the teams are just not good enough that people want to sponsor them anymore. And
Manali,
cricket,
can you hear us?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, where are you calling from?
I'm in Mumbai right now, but I
Oh,
live
good.
in Pune.
Wow.
And I'm from Memphis.
What time is it in Mumbai?
It's
about
like
quarter
late.
to 11.
10:44
Oh, well, it's not too bad.
Friday night.
Fumiko, can you hear me?
Sir.
What are your
I can hear
sports
you fine.
society interests?
Well, gee, that's a hard question because it goes way back. I started out in fencing. I mean, I'm from San Francisco originally, but I started out in fencing, so that's how I started. And I didn't get into like team sports until I was in college, and I actually did men's lacrosse. I'm a girl, but I did men's lacrosse because they needed warm bodies. But yeah, the reason why I'm in is because it had a lot. It did a lot. Well, there was a lot of stuff that was similar to a thesis I was trying to do several years back for my master's degree, and it was on globalization and bullfighting, which didn't take. But yeah, I have to read a lot about it, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So no, but the class itself seemed very structured and similar to how I was trying to explain in my master's thesis, but when I guess it happened for a reason, so it didn't happen.
What were you going to say about globalization and bullfighting?
Well, the thing is that I mean, even though people don't think it was kind of branching out and going to other places. Um, there were like exhibition bullfights in Japan and China, and it like a different sort of bullfighting that was not typical of what we would see here in Mexico or in Colombia or Venezuela or Peru or Spain even, so they actually don't kill the animals in like these newer versions. They use like Velcro so that they could stick their picks in, and they don't end up killing the animal, which in a certain way kind of defeats the purpose. But yeah, I mean it was just an exhibition. Yeah. But it never really took, so
Interesting.
I couldn't really go on that idea.
Biff, where are you calling from?
I'm in Perth, Australia.
All right. What time is it there?
1:15 in the morning, Saturday morning.
Look at you.
Nice.
What's your sports and society interest?
Well, I'm originally from San Francisco. I was born in San Francisco.
People.
And I went to UCLA and was traveling around. Met a girl in Australia, and we got married. And we were living in Santa Monica at the time. After we got married, and I thought it would be Perth would be a good place to hang out. From the mid '90s, I thought California was getting a bit busy.
Yeah, it is.
And so growing up, I was interested in all the sports. Went to Giants games, 49ers games, you name it, and did lots of things around sports. I like my golf. I played at UCLA, but as I say, I carry the jock straps of Corey Pavin and Steve Pate and Duffy Waldorf around.
Well, those are pretty good jock straps to carry, though.
And but since I've been here, I don't really pay attention to as many sports, and I'd rather go out and do things myself. But I figured I did so much that kind of got a little bit tired of it a little bit. So I watch the major sporting events. They have everything on TV here, and obviously still enjoy my golf and getting out and doing with everything myself.
What about Australian rules football? It's kind of dominant there, almost like cricket in India. Not quite as much though, but pretty.
Yeah, AFL Aussie rules football is probably the biggest. Cricket, obviously, right now is going on. We just had the big bash in town tonight, a made-for-TV event, cricket, and the Perth team was in it, and I believe, I didn't see the end of it, I believe they won. So cricket's big, but it obviously doesn't get the people. We have two teams here in Perth, one from Perth and one from Fremantle, and they sell out the stadiums. They get 40,000, or they fill the stadium up pretty much, and they're building a new stadium, starting to build a new stadium now. And there are, in Melbourne, you guys probably don't know, but there's probably, 8 teams in Melbourne, a couple in Perth, one in Brisbane, and a couple in Sydney as well. And so it's very, very popular, and that's a winter game. And very brutal. It's kind of like a mix between boxing, soccer, football, and cross country without pads.
Wow.
Manali, what's your interest in sports and society?
I'm actually on site in India doing research on the gender divide in sports. So I guess I'm beginning to be a sports researcher here. So
you're doing research in India?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the gender divide in sports. So I've focused on a lot of action sports, but stuff that I haven't gotten exposed to until this class. So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. What kind of issues around the gender divide?
Well, I approached it pretty generally, just wanting to explore the gender divide, because I kept hearing when I first moved here from Memphis that girls can't play football, and that really got to me because I played growing up. So I don't know where that was coming from, but I was like, all right, I want to kind of explore it. And I mean, it's crazy the impact of sports that I've seen. I mean, I didn't realize, I should have known, but the way sports has improved some of the lives here, especially at a grassroots level, it's been really cool to see. So I think it's going from gender divide to just the on-site influence of sports for both boys and girls. It's not limited to just girls or anything.
Yeah. We're going to talk about this next week, but it's really interesting because on the one hand, women's sports has grown so much in the last 30 or 40 years in terms of opportunities for participation and celebrity female athletes and some other things. But then on the other hand, a lot has not changed at all. And for example, there's some statistics that show on ESPN, the U.S. sports network, that something like 96% of the coverage is of men's sports and only 4% of women's sports. And the numbers in all these other measures in professional sports in terms of endorsements and money and salaries and numbers of leagues, that women's sports are way behind in terms of popularity still. And it's kind of a contradiction because if you go out like where I live in Durham, North Carolina, on the weekend, like with youth soccer, there'll be just as many girls out there as boys playing in a girls' league. But then you push it up more to the college and professional level, and you start to see these real imbalances. And especially with women, I mean, something that people have thought about is that it's women's team sports that have seemed to do more poorly in terms of getting contracts and attracting attention. It's the sports where women can earn a lot of money and become celebrities are really mostly the individual sports like tennis especially and golf and some Olympic gymnastics and stuff. So there's why is it that people seem to mainly want to watch men in team sports but then women individually? There's a lot of interesting weird stuff going on around gender in sports.
Actually, in Mexico, there was a strong, about maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a girl, her name was Ana Guevara, and she's a track racer. And it was the first time in Mexico, I've been here for about 18 years, it was the first time, I mean, everyone would turn on the television to watch a World Cup final, or they're glued to the set when it's Mexico playing. But that was the first time I had ever seen all of the country watching the television to see Ana Guevara and see if she would win gold, and she won silver that year. First time. Everyone, even the taco stands and stuff, everyone. They were like, wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But
yeah, the Olympics are kind of one of those more gender integrated spaces, both in terms of, I'd say there's probably more focus overall on male sports than female sports, but women's sports get a lot of attention in the Olympics. And then in terms of viewership, I don't know if this is true in other parts of the world, but traditionally in the United States, the Olympics have attracted a much more balanced gender demographic than, say, the Super Bowl or American baseball or whatever. And it partly has to do with the way that the Olympics have traditionally been packaged, that the networks have been very smart about packaging them as a sporting event that men will want to tune into traditionally, but then also kind of making them into this dramatic story where you learn about the athlete from Mongolia who has only one leg and yet is triumphing in this or that sport. So they kind of have figured out how to market sports to kind of both male and female viewing demographics in a way that's really different from more conventional sports.
One of the things that I've noticed here is, for example, NBA. We can count the name of the popular women's and WNBA players in one finger. One biggest popular or the most popular is Cheryl Miller.
Yeah.
And once we start talking about the NBA itself, then you have all these Magic Johnsons and the Larry Birds and things like people like that. And sometimes when you see Cheryl Miller in NBA broadcasts, you're like, what is she doing there? And the popularity is just totally different. In college sports, like I went to Marquette here in Milwaukee, and Marquette basketball is very popular. But Marquette also has very good women's volleyball and women's basketball teams, but they play in a smaller stadium because they only pretty much entertain the parents and the family members and relatives of those players, whereas for Marquette's men's basketball, the Bradley Center is like jam-packed. It's not even full for a Bucks game, a Milwaukee Bucks game. So it's just different because you have March Madness. March Madness is all men's college basketball. You have the NBA Finals, you have the Super Bowl, you have the World Series, and it's not like women don't play these sports. One of the pretty cool things I came across the NFL last year was that I think it was a 6 or 7-year-old girl who was featured in a lot of NFL videos with the commissioner and other people because she was beating out guys in her school in American football, not just any other sport. She was the quarterback, she was the running back, and she was just beating everybody up. So that was pretty cool, I think. But I feel like there's just so much male dominance in especially team sports, like we just talked about, that people sometimes don't see women doing the same thing, or the game not being as competitive as it would be for when men are playing that same game with the same rules.
Well, it's interesting, you know, that's one of the arguments, like when you say, well, women's sports get smaller viewerships, and some people will say, well, like with basketball, you know, it's just that the women's game isn't as good. You don't see as many dunks, and it's a lower quality of game. But, you know, but that doesn't entirely explain things. I mean, because, for example, in the United States, you know, we spend tons of time, as you just said, Praful, watching college basketball, men's college basketball. Well, the quality of men's college basketball is a lot lower than the NBA. So, you know, that's a case of, well, you know, the quality of the game is not as high, but yet tons of people are watching it. So, with like the women's game, you know, I actually think it's very beautiful, and that there are things about the women's game that are, you know, that in some ways it's played better by women's college and WNBA team than by male teams. But it's not exactly, well, like, okay, well, you know, then why aren't people watching women's basketball? And there's these kind of feedback loops, I think, like the networks think that we're not interested in women's sports, so they don't broadcast and cover the games. There's very little newspaper coverage. And, well, if we don't have coverage and games on, then we're not going to be interested. So, you know, so that this kind of stuff, it perpetuates itself in ways that are too bad, I think.
Doesn't
Go ahead.
I also think that it has to. I think it has to do with masculinity in sports. I mean, I think that men traditionally have to have a sport, you know, to prove that they're masculine, and it's not so prevalent in women. And I think maybe that's part of it. That, you know, if you're not a sports fanatic, you're not a man. And I think there's a big tradition in that you're looked upon negatively. Whereas in you know, women could care less. If you want to be a sports person, fine. If you don't, it's not a big issue.
Yeah, definitely sport. I mean, for all the changes, sports is still this kind of, you know, male-coded domain in all kinds of ways. And I mean, I do think things have changed some, and that the idea that you can be a woman and an athlete and a sports fan no longer seems strange to people in the way that it would have, you know, 30 years ago. But at the same time, I think you're totally right, Michelle, that sports and masculinity are kind of this bundle that are wrapped up together. What about sports more? I'd ask you this. I love playing sports. I love watching sports. I teach this class. But I actually think that sports occupy way too big a part of the of the life of the world right now. I mean, I think especially in the United States, but globally, we've never had a moment in history where people spent so much time watching sports, a lot of time playing sports, where sports stars earned so much money, where there was so much attention and visibility played to sports. And I love sports as a kind of diversion and for their beauty and stuff, but I often wonder, all the hours that I'm spending watching sports on TV or following this, I mean, I really would be much better served by reading philosophy or doing volunteer work in the community or thinking about art and photography. And sports has kind of turned into this monster that's colonized a lot of contemporary social life, and that you really, I think, for those of you, if you're not, you have friends or a partner or whoever who's not a sports fan, it's kind of hard not to be a sports fan in the world today, because you're continually assaulted by the advertisements and the promotions. And here in Durham now, every conversation is about college basketball and the Duke Blue Devils. So I feel pretty ambivalent about the role that sports plays right now. I don't know about the rest of you.
Well, in Brazil here, I go to public schools a lot to observe, and the first thing the kids ask me is, which is my time? Which is my team? Like, that's a prerequisite for your identity in Brazil. And when I say I don't have a team, I'm not a sports person. I've never been interested in sports. I don't follow sports. I was just interested in the idea of the effect it has on culture. But here, it's part of your identity. It's like part of being Brazilian. You have to have a time. You have to have that. And there's families that it's like the Civil War. There's families here that go for the Corinthianos and they go for the Fluminense. So there's, and like you're saying, it takes up a lot of time. I think in a really negative way.
I think that, I haven't been here for that long, but imagining India, any community here, any corner here, without an element of cricket and now football would probably be impossible. So I agree with that. It's just inbuilt into the culture. It probably is taking up too much time. But I don't know if I could imagine life without it.
Right.
I'm not quite sure. Like, it would take the identity away from this culture completely.
Yeah. Well, I can remember, I'm old enough, like in the 60s and 70s when, sports was a big part of America, but it was more like you didn't have 24/7 sports channels. You had maybe, and basically only baseball and sometimes football and basketball were on TV. And it was a very different cultural milieu in the sense, there wasn't all this merchandise to buy. There were no sports video games. You could read about sports in the newspaper, but it was a much more limited role that sports played. And back then, I think for everybody, there was a different balance between the percentage of time people playing sports as opposed to watching them. So we've moved over the last 100 years from a planet of players to a planet of watchers, I think. We all play sports and whatever, but the amount of time, I find even among, young, healthy, athletic college students here at Duke, all of them spend more time watching sports on TV than they actually do playing them. So there's been also that kind of shift of from spectatorship, watching, taking up a bigger percentage of I think probably more people play sports now too, but the percentage of people, the amount of time getting spent watching sports has gone way up. And there is a lot of, pleasure, and, I like watching my sports on TV, but I do have this feeling that, that it's a little bit out of whack. And
I agree. I think it's funny to me when I see people say, we won, when they're just sitting on the couch drinking beer and eating pizza. So it's, they associate themselves so strongly with it, but they're not really doing anything. As you say, they're just being totally passive and screaming and yelling, and so they're not getting the benefit of the sport that the players do.
Yeah.
It's even vicariously, really. I kind of feel like this was a question I think was asked in a previous lecture, but the reason or the why of playing, and I kind of feel like that has to do a lot with how a person has to interact with a society, or how to teach a person the basic steps up to like interact. But yeah, I think televising and the merchandising part of it is like follow this like it's exploded to a whole different level that I don't think has anything to do with like that original interaction. Because I mean, with social media and everything, it seems like everything is just kind of type in a word, hashtag,
Yeah.
and that's it. And I
Yeah.
don't feel like there's that social connection anymore.
Yeah. 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 Well,
Or
the thing about sports also is that it tends to close. It's a very kind of self-contained conversation. So with sports, it's you talk about your players, whether your team is winning or losing, the kind of what new players have been signed, but it's a very closed kind of discourse. So it doesn't really tend to lead out into thinking about political issues or about social issues or about kind of thinking beyond sports. And I think part of the appeal, like we like sports, like those of us who are fans, because it's like this self-contained world. But I don't think it's a world that promotes a lot of reflexivity and deep thinking about human existence or anything beyond sports. And that's kind of the reason I really like teaching this course is it's because it's kind of our chance to say, okay, here's sports, but what are some of the bigger things that are going on here beyond just the box scores and what your favorite team is and whether your favorite player is doing well or poorly that season.
And I think the movie, The Two Escobars, was really, and it made me cry. It was very emotional. But the idea that Pablo Escobar, as bad as he was, really had that sense of helping community.
Yeah.
By knowing what it meant to him and how it got him out of a situation. And so it was really interesting that the dichotomy between him as the drug dealer and the murderer and him as the community activist, which, in many ways he was, by putting the sports into the communities that needed them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I find that really, I don't know if the rest of you have seen that, but The Two Escobars is really an extraordinary film, I think, and it's it's so powerful. For those of you who have watched it, it's like it's kind of a Greek tragedy of a documentary, I think.
Warren, just talking. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Just going back on the whole sports thing. It's interesting because I go back and forth from the United States, from Perth a bit, and part of the nice thing about being in Perth is that you're not around the sports feeling that you just need to be watching it all the time. Otherwise, you won't be. Your friends won't be talking to you because you haven't been watching what they're watching, and that you don't know what's happening. And when I fly into Los Angeles or San Francisco, you feel the need. You need to be watching. You need to watch the box scores. And as I call it, it's a bit of file footage, and it's gone crazy. Like you said, way back when they had baseball on the weekends and golf maybe on Saturday and Sunday. I never thought a Golf Channel would make it, but
Right.
What do I know? My God, who wants to watch golf more than on the weekends? People want to watch it.
Well, as you can probably remember, it used to be they just used to broadcast the last 3 or 4 holes of the tournament, and way back when. But sports is like it's like a drug, and I have exactly the same feeling. Biff, I was in Italy teaching for 4 months last year, and in Italy, Italians love their soccer, but it's not a super big sports culture. And, when I came back, so I really wasn't paying much attention. I went to a soccer game or two, but then when I came back to the United States, all of a sudden I found myself, watching TV at night and talking about sports with friends and stuff. And, on the one hand, it was pleasurable, but it also, it kind of felt like an addiction, and I felt in a way free to be in Italy. It was kind of like, wow, I don't need to be watching these games or reading the sports pages or getting on SportsIllustrated.com all the time to be a human being, and that it actually kind of feels better not to be so plugged into the mother's milk of sports. But and I do think it's really an American. That their sports has gone crazy globally. but I think America really is, the kind of sports craziest of societies. I don't know, like, is that, I mean, in India, I don't imagine, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of stuff like you were saying about cricket, but is it as sports saturated a culture as the United States?
I wouldn't say sports saturated, but definitely cricket saturated. It's just cricket. Cricket is what people live for in India. Before, it used to be just playing internationally, so India would travel as a team. So you had these months divided. It wasn't as bad back then because India would tour England one year, India would tour West Indies the other year. So they would go on tours like that. But now the Indian businessmen, they have followed the same structure as we have here in the States of having professional cricket leagues. There's a big Indian Premier League, which is just what the NFL is here or what Major League Baseball is. And people, so now India goes to a tour, comes back, the players play in this professional league, and then after that's done, they go on to the other tours or some other teams come to play India. Earlier, it was they'd go on a tour, they'd rest for a couple months, another team would come, and you still had some time in between. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there's just 24/7 media coverage. Every little thing, whatever happens in sports, it's just captured so badly. Tiger Tracker, like websites really have a Tiger Tracker link where you can track how Tiger Woods is doing in every tournament he's playing in. So, and here in the States, it's just so well formed. NFL finishes up in February. You have basketball going on. March is the start of baseball. September, baseball finishes up. Football starts. And that's you just can't get enough of sports. That's like a conversation starter for most people.
For men, yeah.
Exactly. Here in Wisconsin, we have Green Bay. Who would know about Green Bay, Wisconsin, if it wasn't for the Green Bay Packers? Because people there are all about the Packers. They don't have enough people to fill the whole stadium up.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just fascinating how sports is just getting bigger and bigger. And I think the biggest contributor is the coverage that it's getting, media-wise, games, merchandise. You listen to ESPN, you watch ESPN, it's the same news over and over again, just different analysts.
Yeah, exactly. We just have a couple minutes left. I was curious to ask all of you just a little bit about the experience of doing a course online, because this is just the second time that I've taught this. I'm just curious for me it's totally different teaching a Coursera course than a regular course, just because of the absence of face-to-face contact, and it's the exciting part of teaching a Coursera course is there's from people from all around the world, and so many of us, but then I also feel kind of like, at a distance from all of you. I mean, I really love being able to do this hangout. This is like my favorite part of the class, but it's really weird to be teaching just staring at a camera, and I'm curious, for you, if you've taken other courses or what you think about this whole thing of online classes.
It's the first time I've taken it. I've taught and worked with online classes for language, for teaching English, and I have trouble with them because as a language teacher, you really need to be using the language and communicating with someone. But on the other hand, if you look at it from the point of view of what it is, I think that I really enjoy it. I mean, I am enjoying this class. I have to say, Oren, that your lectures are quite witty and fun. So I enjoy listening to them. I like the readings, but I think that, as you say, this is nice to have this interaction. I think that is the positive aspect, is you can be with people all around the world, which you can't be in a regular classroom setting.
Yeah. One of the cool things, like for me, in terms of sports, if you go on the discussion boards, is all of these different things that are happening in different countries around the world. So, like, I had never, with some of the people in the class from Ukraine who were posting about Klitschko, the boxer, and his involvement in anti-government protests. And these are, we tend, I think, with sports, the coverage tends to be like what's happening in that country. So cricket in India, whatever the sport happens to be at that moment in the United States, soccer in Italy, but we tend not to really know that much about sports, politics, anything about sports in other countries. And this really, like the class, just gives you this totally different global perspective on the different things that are going on in sports and the different issues, and really how quite different often it is from country to country.
And actually,
Any other of you?
in real time.
I think it's an amazing opportunity what we're getting. It must be very difficult for the lecturers to sit there and look at a camera and not get much feedback. It's got to be very difficult. It's obviously changing schooling, or will be changing schooling forever. It will be very interesting to see what happens. But there's nothing like sitting in a room listening to the lecture right there, from the horse's mouth.
Right.
But to reach people all over the world, it's very cool. But I wonder what university is going to look like in 10 years.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's some, like at Duke, there are some faculty members who are really don't really like the idea of online education, and I'm not exactly clear why. I think one of the fears, I don't think this is justified, but is that universities may ultimately want to cut back the number of faculty because instead they can just have some professors doing these online courses and use them as opposed to hiring a bunch of new faculty who so that there'll be a smaller student-teacher ratio. I'm not sure about that fear, but I think people do, certainly like part of the educational experience. I mean, I know for me, hearing the lecture, going to class was only a relatively small part of your educational experience. The much more of it is like meeting other students, the conversations you have, being on campus where you're going to different events and all, and that kind of stuff. And online education, it's a different kind of, like, you're meeting people but more at a distance, and I love the global feel of it, but then it feels like that you lose certain things. But then on the other hand, it's free and it's democratic. I mean, it's just like a jumble of contradictions as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's the way the world is going. Everything is right here in your pocket, unfortunately.
To a degree, although the other thing that I've noticed about this is the technology is not ready for prime time yet. I mean, like last week we had to cancel the Google Hangout. You guys, I can mostly hear what you're saying, but it's like, there's feedback and whatever. And then for us in filming the lectures, it's really hard the quality is not that great. It should be a lot better. But like getting somebody who has the expertise to film the lecture so that the sound is good and the lighting is good, that's a whole nother. So there's also like, we're into the digital age, and presumably all this stuff will get better, but yet the technology is still a limitation in some ways, even though it's enabling us to, have this conversation and to do an online class.
And here in the fellowship program that I'm in Manaus, in Amazonas, Manaus, where there are communities that take maybe 3 weeks to get to in a boat, they put a fellow there in the English language fellow program, and he actually broadcast and Skyped his English lessons to 30,000 students in the Amazon that would have never, ever had the opportunity to have interaction. So that to me was really exciting. Yeah. And the government of Amazonas has put satellite dishes all over the that area of the Amazon, so students can access education. So that's very exciting, because in the past they would have to go into Manaus to be educated. Yeah. Now they can stay in their community. So.
Yeah.
Oren, I will say that, especially because we don't get to interact with you one-on-one, like as we're reading or during the lectures, the pivotal part of this class that I've really liked is that your lectures are really well organized. Like the fact that you have those keywords at the beginning, you go through them, as the other two had said. Like they're, I think, the base of this class. I wouldn't be interested if you gave really boring lectures throughout the class. So that's, I think, the most helpful part. And I'm sure, like Jeff said, it's probably really tough for you to be sitting there just talking like at us at that moment. But that's really helpful. And the discussion boards they're well done. I don't know if the TAs organize them or if you do, but just the division of how they've done it, they're well done.
Thanks, that's great. We actually, that was a big problem with the first time I taught the course. The discussion boards were like the Wild West, and it was like there was all kinds of weird stuff on the boards, and then we had a few people who were really mean that we had to block, and it was just a disaster. So this time we really tried to organize them, and then we have these community TAs they're all volunteers. You've probably seen them on the boards. They took the course the first time, and so they're like the sheriffs who are helping keep keep order in the Wild West of the discussion boards. But yeah, thanks. I just, for all of you, I'm sure, like, it's just a totally different. Communicating online is really different from communicating in person, because so much of I'm sure all of you have made presentations to big groups, but you take so much of your cue from what you sense in the audience, like, oh, I can see people are all getting bored, I better tell a joke or go on and to another topic, or, oh, I can see people are really interested, maybe I should go on, and you have none of those cues with online things, so it's almost like, you would need to do this for years to learn how to really do it right. Like I've been teaching as a university professor for more than 20 years, so I pretty much know how to give a lecture and run a seminar in a non-virtual space, but it's a whole nother art. And a lot of us professors also, it's like we're not very good communicators. Like if we were charismatic personalities or whatever, we'd be in the movies or as TV broadcasters. So it's also kind of like a lot of us are not really cut out for doing these broadcasting, filming type things. So it's been a fun experience, but a challenging one.
I would agree with the challenging part, because it's challenging to stand in a class of a relatively non-diverse group in today's world when we need to be so politically correct in whatever we say, and then having people from all over the world and making sure you don't press any of their sweet spots, which could just totally freak them out. And I agree that it has to be challenging that way. I would think if I was teaching this class, that would be probably one of the biggest challenges that I would face, to make sure if not making everyone happy, I'm not upsetting a lot of people, which is hard to do in a class of 20 people.
Yeah.
So but it's fascinating just to take these different courses.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining in. And next week, if you're interested, Selena Roberts, we're doing one at this time, I think the same time on Friday, if any of you are interested. She used to have have a column for the New York Times, and she was a main writer at Sports Illustrated, and she's a smart, interesting person, has written a couple different books, and she actually wrote one book, I think, about the Olympic figure skating or gymnastics, I forget which, so I think she also will have some interesting things to say about the Olympics. And then she has a lot to say about gender and women's issues in sports, because there are relatively few sports journalists who are women so far. So yeah, but thank you so much I really enjoyed the conversation. It's really,
thank you.
Really means a lot to me to get to see your faces and interact a little bit.
It was fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.